So I just thought I'd start by introducing our webinar series and saying hello to everyone. It's great to see people signing in from all over the province, including some places that I'm assuming are pretty socked in with smoke right now. So it's great to see some of you able to still get to your computers for one thing, but also to be able to join us on the webinar today. And hopefully that situation gets fixed soon as well. It's been very interesting following for us here in the office, following everybody. Lots of museums out in the interior, and we hope that the fires stay away from all of you. But thank you for joining us regardless. This is the fourth of the BCMA webinars, so we're really excited that this program has kicked off and that it's getting a lot of interest from people. We have 21 people signed in so far, with probably a few more people sitting around those computers. So it's really great for us to be able to see this program getting interest from you. Lots of different people each time, lots of different topics as well, so we hope that it's of interest to you. This is our fourth one, as I mentioned. It's going to be about the 4 Ps of public programming with Lesley Moore. But the webinar series is presented by the BC Museums Association and the Royal BC Museum here in Victoria. They've co-sponsored it with us, and we're really excited to have that behind us. Now, I love public programming. I'm a big fan of public programming. Oh, and I should tell you who I am first. Sorry, I have my slides backwards right now. But my name is Ben Fast, as you can see on the slide there. I'm the Programs and Communications Coordinator for the BC Museums Association, and I'm here to facilitate the webinar. So if you have any technical questions, you can write it in the chat window, or you can send me a message. My email is bfast@museumsassn.bc.ca. So I'm the one that runs the tech side behind here, in my little cubicle in Victoria. So feel free to send me an email if you're having any troubles. And I will just be the one moving the slides forward until Lesley starts. Now, as I mentioned, I love public programming. I've done public programming at a bunch of different museums I've worked at, and I've noticed that if you look at the pictures especially, I sort of have a trend in my public programming. I like to dress up, it seems, and also when I'm not dressing up, I'm standing around in a rain jacket pointing at old things. So that's the way that my public programming experience has gone. And that said, when I'm not actually doing it myself, I often visit museums and I take part in public programs, which can be life-threatening, as you can see in this bottom center picture here, taken at the castle, the Edinburgh Castle. Now, I'm really excited because I know that Lesley knows a lot more about public programming than I do, so I'm going to learn a lot through this webinar as well, so I'm really excited for that. Now, how to use this webinar, I see a lot of people have already gotten the chat function down, but if you're still yelling at the computer trying to ask a question, I can't hear you, we can't hear you, you don't need a microphone or a webcam for this. Please use the chat function. It's that little box right there. You should have a black bar somewhere on your screen that you'll be able to find and open the chat function. It might be under the More option, just in case. And you can use that, but make sure that it's to the all panelists and all attendees, because then that way everybody can see your question. We can spark some dialogue that way. If you have it to only to the all panelists, it's only me and Lesley that get to see that. So that's what it should look like in your little chat window there. If you have any questions, like I said, send me an email or write in the chat function so that we can make sure we see it. I see there's lots of people signing on and saying hi. Hi from Delta, Abbotsford, Sunshine Coast is represented. That's great. I see some people from here in Victoria, Vancouver, Kamloops, Sydney, Kelowna, Coquitlam, White Rock, Terrace, Vernon. I think that's about everybody that signed in so far. If I'm missing anybody, feel free to shout out to your cities there. But I'd like to move on now that we're about 12:05. I'd like to move on to introduce our webinar presenter for this month. This month's presenter is Lesley Moore. She's the museum manager at Ladysmith and District Historical Society. And Lesley was telling me a little bit about how she got into public programming, and I hope she won't mind if I share this, but she actually has been running and creating public programs since being the Sunday afternoon program assistant back when she was in university at the then recently opened Museum of Anthropology at UBC. So she's got a lot of experience in this field. Since then, she has implemented public programs at a range of museum spaces and cultural community places, including a museum of archaeology, a regional heritage site, and a community museum and a multi-use cultural center. So she's going to tell you a lot about the tried and true methods of public programming and really get us started in that. So I'm going to bring her on here, hopefully.
Hello, everyone.
I can hear you, and we're just getting your webcam up now, Lesley. Now Lesley's going to go through her presentation, and if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat window, and I'll interrupt and read them out, or we'll just have a time for questions afterwards. So either way, we'll make sure that we get your question read out. And so Lesley, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm probably just going to step away and mute myself and pop off the screen so that I'm not a distraction. So if you want to go ahead and share your screen, Lesley, then we can get started.
Okie doke, I am going to do that right now. Is it up?
No, and it might be because I'm in the, there we go, perfect. Yes.
So from the beginning then. First, a little bit about why I was so interested in doing this presentation. I'm at the tail end of active work in the museum field. I've had so many amazing experiences, both in successes and failures. I have developed my own approach because simply you can get much theory about programming, but on the practical side. So this presentation is very much based on practice. And this first screen just hopefully tweaks in you some of the reasons why you do public programming. So those words, specifically those often used right now, engaging, immersing, participative, inclusive, relevant. Those are the outcomes we're going to try and achieve in our programs. But where do we begin? What's needed to begin? Why? For whom? And really, not every brilliant idea becomes a great program. So this webinar presents strategies and checklists for program development with a sampling of shining successes and pitfalls to avoid.
Hey, Lesley,
now, if you have questions, I'm going to have...
Can I just cut in and ask if you can go to the full screen there, Lesley?
My apologies. Okay, full screen is coming.
Awesome, thank you.
Is that good?
I might have a little bit of a lag on yours, so oh, it's gone to setup show for some reason.
Perhaps remind me how I meant to get to...
Under the slideshow tab,
okay,
you got from current slide or from beginning.
Yep.
One of the two. You might need to close that setup show there.
Okay. How's that?
Awesome, thanks.
Okay, now I need to move forward. So, the objectives. To understand what public programming is, to assess what perspectives, skills, and resources are essential to do it, tools for the how of how to innovate and bring to reality your own public programs. So the basics, what is public programming? It's a public service museums provide where public can mean a way of connecting and bringing together communities. Programming consists of a wide range of activities, experiences, and practices where knowledge is creatively shared. So let's get with the program. Program can be interpreted quite broadly. The current sort of best practice, if you will, is any participatory activity that is offered to the visiting public, whether it's free or by charging. It's often an enhancement to an exhibition or object on or display. And let's not forget that public can be in the museum, in the community, or online. So why do we do public programs? The most obvious, to bring people through the door and to generate operating revenue. We also believe we need to improve access to the museum's resources. We want to develop a sustainable broad base of support so we can continue on our plans and to respond to changing social priorities and conditions. We want to build community. Well, we can't be all things to all people. I always think of Bob Dylan's, you can please some of the people all of the time, you can please all of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. And if we try to do so, we really get totally bogged down. I think we also agree that museums are cornerstones in our communities. We define ourselves in our mission and vision statements. So how do we describe our programs? Again, I'm trying to build a basis so we can get at the 4 Ps, the 4 pillars, if you will. On-site and outdoor programming suitable for all age groups. Explore the fascinating natural and cultural history of place. Hands-on with the tools, tips, and tricks as you dig through the past. A catalog of offerings, numerous, educational, and fun. Intergenerational arts and cultural programs. So you can see why we want to establish our identity, and to do that, we absolutely must have a mission and a vision. Every museum requires a mission statement and a vision. I'm sure you all know that. Let's revisit what a mission is. It's the declaration of our core purpose and focus. Usually comes across as being a little dull and obvious. However, it's a declaration that we can all agree on. The vision is a 1-sentence statement describing clear and inspirational long-term change. And even if you have these statements, they should be alive, so we need to revisit and update them as needed. So these are 2 examples of mission statements, and I use them because they represent the more traditional and also the moving forward, getting beyond tradition. So the Richmond Museum collects, documents, researches, preserves, exhibits, and interprets objects of historical and cultural significance to the development and history of Richmond. I always find I catch my breath, but you know what? I wrote that, 20-odd years ago, actually maybe 30-odd years ago. Touchstones Nelson serves as the cultural touchstone for Nelson and District. And you then think, what does that mean? Well, they're serving the district. Examples of vision. Our vision is to make the history of Richmond relevant, engaging, accessible. That's very clear. And then for Nelson, a vibrant community-based organization dedicated to being a significant cultural anchor. Those are the key words, and that's what you need to look for in your vision, because ultimately that inspires your programming. Now here's inspiration and engagement and enthusiasm. A pause. Any questions? If so, don't hesitate to use chat. So the 4 Ps, the theme for this webinar, it's the 4 legs of the programming platform. Our purpose is the mission statement. Why are we here? How are we justifying our organization's existence? Planning, we need to analyze our organization's strengths, weaknesses, and challenges for opportunity out there. Practice is the ends and means by which we justify our purpose, and process, the means by which our purpose, planning, and practice are carried out. So this is the framework. And this is a little bit of the essential. And policy can be overwhelming, but what policy does for your programs, it helps you avoid trying to be all things to all people, helps you avoid being reactive to what the latest fad is, and it helps you avoid wasting resources you don't have. The policy should link directly to your mandate and support the vision. It must demonstrate genuine commitment. Does your museum have a program policy? So the policy is the lens that provides the focus for your programs. It should be a concise statement that includes your scope, intended content, the audiences you want to reach, the methods you do it, who's responsible, decision process. it can be quite comprehensive. And I will be happy to send example policy statements out to those who would like them after the webinar. So again, underlying your policy, you need your core values and beliefs. And what are some of your museum's values? Whoops. General respect and interest in your visitors, their experiences, their stories and abilities. And I should add, listening. You believe in listening. You want to foster an inclusive reciprocal, I can't talk today, reciprocal relationship with those in your community. Perhaps your museum wants to be an agent for change. Perhaps you want to be a mechanism for sustaining the social identity of your community. Maybe you're responding to issues. You want to be a place for people. And now more than ever, we want, I hope, we want to involve the audience in the creative process. So having those basic tenets, where do we go from there? Well, we want to get into program development, figuring out what your program is going to be about. As we just said, purpose guides the planning, and you usually have a list of ideas going into it with the goals to achieve and with measurable results. So just a quick answering of the questions. Yes, the presentation will be available afterwards. And as I say, I'm more than happy to communicate with all of you afterwards. So we always go into program planning with a whole range of ideas, simply because we're in the community, we hear from people, but how do you actually get a handle on all of it? I recommend brainstorming, if only because it gets outside individuals' own preferences, own ways of thinking about what the museum should be or they want it to be. Often we use a visitor exit survey. I'll go into that in more detail in a bit. We will borrow ideas and adapt others' successes. So we make a list of these ideas, and then I really recommend just doing a quick describing of how that idea moves into being a program. Everyone will probably roll their eyes when I say a SWOT analysis, but you know, it's a tried and true way of weeding things out. You need to know your organization in order to do it. You need to have a sense of your community, where it's been, where it is now, and where it's moving in the future. So let's do a quick SWOT. Your strengths. You know what has worked well. Your weaknesses. You know where things have not worked. You have not achieved your goals. Opportunities. You might be doing a new exhibit. There may be a new initiative out there in the community. I like using the word challenges instead of threats, because challenges are a reality, and it approaches looking at what is a challenge, a threat for you, if you will. For example, say a new entertainment complex is opened, or as what happened to me once, a new children's museum opened up next door. That was a real competition. So planning. I mentioned the 5 W's and the H. And you want to ask these questions first to those inside and then to those outside. And you say, what the heck is she talking about? So inside of those are those people in your organization, your volunteers, your staff, your board, those who are within. Hopefully you're not looking inward, but you're within the organization. Who is outside can be any range of people in your community. Whoops, and I think I got out of sequence. Just bear with me. So you have made a list of some of your ideas, and so the program possibilities. You want to ask the questions, and you want to answer them based on where you're at here and now. You can do that. You're well on your way to developing a program. And, you know, I might add, don't assume you know these questions and their answers, because truly programming is always evolving. There are always new expectations, always many choices. So let's just quickly work through it. And these aren't all of the who's. And, you know, afterwards, if you want to follow through on this process, feel free to add the who's that are relevant to you and your organization. Who plans? With whom are you planning? And who are you gearing the programs for? Is there consultation or participation, collaboration or partnering with others in your community? For whom are you doing this planning? You want to link to the mission statement. You may have specific audiences already identified. And the who decides on what programs you do starts with the program policy, and then as you move through the questions. So what are the goals and objectives? What resources do you have available? What do you need? What are our values? When do you start planning? Well, truly, you're always planning in the big picture, but specifically for a program, you need to have a beginning and an end. You need to know when you want to offer it, how often you offer it. You want to consider when are the other programs and events in the community, when are your deadlines. The most important bit would be the publicity and registration. The why, again, is going from the general to specific. Why are we doing this? Why is it important? Why does it take so long to plan? Where is the program going to be held? Where will we promote the program? Again, these are example questions. How do we carry the program out? How will we know if we are successful? How do we know who will come to it? But really, how? With collaborators, with co-creators. Are we going to borrow from our neighbor's garden and adapt? So as you go through those questions, hopefully, in thinking about those inside and those outside, you realize we have three main approaches or methods. Programs that are audience-centered, the traditional museum-generated, and then the public-facing. And nothing's wrong with still doing the traditional approach, the museum-generated, because many cases, given your resources, you then are able to offer something and shape it so that people can come in and make their own meaning during the program. That's equally as relevant as doing something very audience-centered, aiming for a specific audience and planning for them. So in this case, the audiences are the outside that come in. Public-facing, that is involving people out there in your stakeholders, in your visitors, and it's involving their voices from the beginning. They inform, they invigorate, and they take us on the inside out there. Here I have an example. Let's just have a quick look at the how they frame themselves. We're opening new possibilities for audiences to engage with artists, designers, and cultural producers. MAD organizes a broad spectrum of innovative and exploratory programs that foster further expansion of creative practices. So in that, you have a link to their mandate, you can sense their values and beliefs and the method in which they arrive at their programs. And, you know, just looking at the list below, those are the kinds of programs they offer. So this is one of the tools I use. You have your list of ideas, the possibilities, and how do you make it become a program? So this checklist, and again, you will probably adapt it for your own program, but as you fill in the spaces, you'll discover that you're eliminating some ideas and highlighting the ones to go forward with. So what you do is you plug an idea in. So this is something I did in Richmond many years ago. It was called Museum on the Move. And the description was simply to put together temporary displays that go out into the community in libraries and community centers that have activities occur adjacent to the display. And you then go, how relevant is that? And just for simplicity's sake, yes, it was relevant because one of our priorities was to raise awareness. Yes, we consider our mission. Well, that description I just gave you is a little dull. So the action is to flesh it out, make it come alive. Resources, we have resources identified in our business plan, and they might say, for example, X amount of money is identified to community outreach program. So MUM is a community outreach program. We think we have identified the audience by saying we're going out to those who go to the community centers or the library. But we haven't really, and we need to ask a whole lot of questions to determine if there is, in fact, an audience that will stop and look at the display and want to participate in an activity. Yes, we have staffing, but we need volunteers to help. Do we have the knowledge to deliver the content? Well, I meet with the rec center programmers. They're the ones that determine the activities in these rec centers. How do we fit in with what they produce? They have the knowledge as to what works. Publicity, again, a reminder, you want to consider when the deadline is to getting the information out. And again, with this Richmond example, the key publicity was being part in the Parks and Recreation program flyer. Rationale for doing, you work with the community, you meet this year's priority. Desired results, you want the Museum on the Move to be fully booked. And then you want to basically record that you've made the decision to proceed, the date you decide, and the fact it's approved by your board. So I obviously haven't filled in everything, and again, it's meant to be a tool and to capture the going through the process. Now this is an aside, and I don't want to add yet another layer to it. But if you have a business plan and it's done annually, it really assists your program planning because you'll know what the priorities are, what for activities, the budget, who your stakeholders are. And that's beyond the scope of the particular webinar. But I wanted to mention that because it's something you should ask to see. Okay, we're getting into the practice leg, if you will, of public programming. And the question is, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the thing right? This is one of Michael Ames's touchstones. Michael had been the director of the Museum of Anthropology and a real force in developing the museum studies there and in making museums relevant. And I find this such a useful thing to ask myself along the way. So I recommend, rather than getting into the very complicated evaluation methods of formative evaluation and summative evaluation, I'm very practical. And in your program planning, yes, you need evaluation. When you implement the program, yes, you need to be able to evaluate it. So there's a cycle: program development, implementation, and strongly recommend a post-program debrief. So at each stage there, you make a point of having someone observing and reflecting on what's working, what's not, and making notes to capture everything in the moment. The debrief is essential, and you go back to what your goals were. You look at your notes from your active evaluation, and lo and behold, you have a summary of what worked and what didn't. The active evaluation that I propose here is cyclical, and you have the debrief of one program becoming the starting point for the development of a new program. So we're moving on to process. So that's the fourth leg of the program platform, and the means by which our purpose, planning, and practice are carried out. So this is where we all tend to do programming. We may be told by the curator, we have this new exhibit, I want you to do a program for it. This is what I was thinking. You're given the idea and you get right into the pre-planning, and don't look at what we've just gone through with the other three legs of your program development. And you can say, well, I know it works. Often I don't have the time. Often I don't have the resources. But in many ways, you're wasting your effort because you haven't put things in the established framework. You know, why your museum exists, what you want to accomplish. So pre-planning, setup, running, and takedown are really all the results. Being able to do that is the basis of going through the process we just have. So the pre-planning, we're moving into the practice now. So you want to have your one-page program outline. I have a wonderful template that I will send to you. I couldn't figure out how to fit it on the screen, so I will certainly send it to you afterwards. And again, there's a lot of information here, but this, what you want to capture here is the detail. So everybody knows. So you know you're proceeding with the resources. The who does what and when, you know, make it clear. If you have volunteers involved, you know, assign their roles, involve them in the planning meetings. What is your content? Have it articulated so everyone understands what it is. How are you going to deliver it? Is it an interpreter? Is it through a game online? You need to make sure you've identified the AV and technical requirements. That's an obvious one we often forget. For implementation, you always remind yourself to test it in advance. You want to have your schedule and sequence of activity. You want to assign the resources. You need to note what's missing and needed. And having done that, you need to find the means by which you're going to fill in those gaps. So sponsors, partners, in-kind, materials and services donation. Okay, I'm going to move on to some examples. And I'm going to start with a few successes and a few failures that I have experienced, and perhaps it'll give you the confidence to acknowledge what you have failed in and what you have succeeded at. And truly, there aren't any failures. It's just not perhaps gauging the right time to do something. So success, I mentioned the Museum on the Move. It was actually called Richmond Museum on the Move. It was the one thing that raised the visibility of the museum, that helped people know there was a museum in Richmond. Another success, no money for programming. I just started doing little discovery sheets that were available at the entrance to the museum to have people going around and explore and get to know what the museum offered. Taking a risk, well, When I was hired, everyone thought we needed to build on agricultural history. That was a key part of how Richmond came to be. So we thought, well, let's do a temporary exhibit. Let's involve people in producing it. So it was called From Mud Flatters to Garden City. So a catchy title, what the heck is a mud flatter? It was what people in Vancouver called those who worked in Richmond out there in the Delta in the mud. And as a program, we thought, well, there's this amazing resource person, and we brought him in and we publicized it, your chance to understand the importance of agriculture, who was involved in it, what is needed for it to continue to provide our food. It was the beginnings, if you will, of the urban food network. Well, 4 people came. And so initially an absolute flop. But that exhibit was borrowed and circulated around. And so even though the program wasn't relevant and nobody cared, it had made an impact in its own way. Okay, things to try and avoid. Well, my failure, if you will, if we offer it, people will come. It's like if we build it, people will come. That really doesn't take us anywhere. So before we get into the questions and answers, I'm going to ask you to quickly read through this quiz, which is to get at why you do public programming where you are. So just mentally go through and identify those that apply to your particular museum and your experience.
While they're thinking of that, Lesley, I was thinking I did a program once where nobody showed up. So I know that this is a real thing that can happen to anybody.
And it's just part of the process. And we learn so much from it. Now, I resisted putting the word edutainment in there for a while when theme parks were evolving and activity centers rather than a museum with a collection and exhibits, etc. And it was it had real impact on many museums, particularly little museums, and focused on their own communities, because how on earth did you get the resources to do a mini Epcot Center or a mini Science World? So I didn't put that in, but enabling fun is there, and it's there because, my goodness, if people can't enjoy, even if it's a very simple topic, you're not going to get that people will come back. And the drop-in service is something we always have to be aware of that. I think in every single museum I've worked in, we've had people drop off, whether it's their mother, grandparent, or young kids. Oh, go into the museum. I'll come back in an hour. I need to shop. We don't. That's not a function of our programming. So I hope you've all had a chance to just go through that and just set it aside for now. And there's a further quiz that I will just distribute to everyone after the webinar. Okay, a few examples. Now, I love this because I've started in Ladysmith with, well, basically, there haven't been public programs. And so what have I gone to as a way of getting something going this summer? Well, I still have 2 students. Well, games. Everyone likes games, whether they're online, they're the traditional picnic games, they're your video games, the board games. So I saw this and I thought, this is an art gallery. And this is their key program to accompany this particular exhibit. And I think it's very effective because it touches the museum's mission, which is to make art informative, build creativity and understanding. And this particular artist is working in, you know, the new technologies, is working with art students and local artists. And she had a passion for play. And so to me, this is a wonderful marrying of mission, purpose, an exhibit. I always look to the big guys. One, to realize they do this based on enormous resources and staff well beyond our ability, but also to focus on how they present themselves and say, okay, well, how if I try and apply that to my particular organization? So they came up with the Getty 360 just because of the absolutely overwhelming range of their events and programs. I mean, it's everything from the usual curator talk and an exhibit through to experimental theater. And it literally, there are no boundaries to what they do. The reach, again, I'm not going to go through this with you other than to suggest you peruse this. A tremendous amount of effort went into, first of all, the planning and design of the Reach Museum Gallery in Abbotsford. It was a new sort of a space, enormous expectations, and, you know, not much time to really get up and running. So I recommend you reading it through, because you get to the end and you go, wow, okay, here's an organization that knows its community, knows what it can offer, knows what it's meant to be doing, has vision and values, and it's public facing, so they're on the leading edge of where museums are going. So anyway, I include this on that basis, and there are many others, of course. I pull up the Robert Bateman Center. Again, it's a newer organization in the province. Didn't have a stated mission or mandate that I could find, other than this quote from Robert Bateman, which was his inspiration as an artist and a facilitator and an advocate. And what did they do with that? Well, this very popular program that they offer, it's called the Junior Sketch Club. The rationale for doing the program is right there, and it ties right back to that quote Bateman had. And again, I'm not going to go through it all with you, we don't have the time, but just again, refer to it, because there is an absolutely bang on description of what the program is. So people read that and they know whether or not they want to follow it. And last but not least, our provincial organization, and it's gone through many iterations over the years. Again, I will share this with you, and just want to point out, we all fit in this, and that of course is its role, because it's the provincial organization. You can see the mandate, and if we look closely, you can see what each of us do will fit in there. Their vision: we strive to broaden understanding, inspire curiosity and wonder. Well, again, I think most of us would have that in our values, what we want to bring. So our vision can relate to theirs. And then this is a program policy, and again, reaching on the values. So again, this is a nice, short, concise, and clear statement of the museum. and its programming. And then again, you go through that and you say, wait a minute, aren't they doing what Lesley said to avoid, which is trying to be all things to all people? But if you go through each one, you find that they've gone through the programming framework that I have gone through with you in this webinar, and they've very specifically developed the programs from that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the questions and answers. And shall we open up the floor?
Yeah, definitely. I think that if anybody has any questions, feel free to use the chat. If there is anybody that wants to tell a story or something and has a webcam, we can promote you to a panelist, so we can jump you into the presentation if you want. But I think we should start with some questions and see if anybody has any of those. Might take a little while for people to type them into the chat here, so give them a couple minutes.
And while they're doing that, I would say what I've presented was a deliberate attempt to give you the framework, you know, to refresh and revitalize where you've been if you're starting new. So it isn't the be all and end all. It's meant to help you get right into it and get on with it.
And Sarah asks, what is your annual budget typically for programming?
Well, I can say that for the new museum I'm working at, there is no budget. Up in where I was previously a National Historic Site, it was a percentage of our anticipated revenue. In other words, we had to raise money in order to do programming.
And Terry asks, I have been asked to prepare an exhibitions policy. Is that the same as a programs policy?
No, it isn't. But the two policies will support each other. And I can certainly, and this is something I can discuss with you, Ben. I mean, I have so many resources. I'm happy to share examples with people.
Sure, we can get those sent out for sure. Rob was interested in hearing a few more of your successes, especially those that didn't require a big budget.
I think probably a successful program is walking tours. The walking tours I did all those years ago in Richmond are still there and being run. And why? Well, anybody are interested in being out there, getting in some exercise. It's an easy way of learning history, if you will. In terms of what was involved in producing them, there was immediate information available. You know, photographs in the archives, the heritage inventory had information on particular sites and buildings. That always worked. I mentioned the discovery sheets, which is providing activity when people do drop in, not really having a goal for coming to the museum, but it gives them something to do. It's a different way of looking at what's in the museum. Successes, boy, I didn't want to get into the full-blown events as public program, but sometimes having one annual event that you really put a lot of effort in, that involves a lot of people and just captures their imagination, can work enormously well. Again, when I started in Port Edward, what were the programs? Well, there was an old-timers reunion, a cannery workers reunion, as we called it. What that was just a simple getting people together, having a few topics to get the discussions going, giving them lunch and a tour of the museum. What else? So very little budget. Another special event was, wow, Halloween. And I know I had to get my head around that, given that it was a National Historic Site. But, you know, it was off season. And the cannery site in the darker days of October was a little spooky. So it was a wonderful venue. I hope these help a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Alyssa and Jay Ferguson, I think it's John Ferguson, they've both asked similar questions. So what are some of the best ways that you found to get the word out about community programs, or sort of most efficient, effective ways of advertising to get people to come?
Well, right off the bat, word of mouth, basically just starting with those in the museum, the volunteer staff board. Hey, this is happening. You know, share the information on our social media, like we have a Facebook page or in a blog. Leading up to the event, we found doing tweets. And then, of course, you need to follow through with that during the event, which is, hey, this is what's happening, come and join us. So again, very immediate ways of getting the word out. Again, look at what's in your community that seems to always be there. I mentioned the Parks and Recreation program guides. Often the distribution for that, yes, they're still doing hard copy, but they also have it online. Keep your website updated. If you keep your website updated, you'll find people will always visit it. Again, it's an effort to do, I know, but people need to trust how you get the information out. Nothing's wrong with flyers. You know, we all know the places in your community where people go on a regular basis. So the library, the grocery store, the visitor center. Think where those information sources are and get your information there. So there's a whole range. You know, the old-fashioned way, word of mouth is still, I think, one of the most effective. So talk it up. Use your Facebook, your blogs, your Twitters. Getting that public image out there. So the flyer, what you put on your website, again, your Facebook page, TripAdvisor, you know, put things out there on TripAdvisor, and then respond to what people say to your posting.
So I have one question lined up here from John McKenzie, but if there's maybe one other one, if anybody has a final one. Oh, and I also have one from Lane. So maybe one more after that. We'll do these two and maybe three really quick. So John asks, in the list of purposes of public programming, are the items all equally important, or does one or a few stand out in your mind as being more significant than the others? I think that was one of the lists you showed earlier.
Well, again, it's very much related to where your particular museum is at. And I mean, that is certainly a little subjective. I realize that. But I think if oh God, purpose, you know, what's your biggest priority? And, you know, comes down to, if there was one thing that you wanted to accomplish with a program, what would that be?
Okay. Lane has a question. Coming from a small community heritage site, we find all people want to participate in what we have to offer, which I think is a great thing, Lane. But is there a way to make all the people happy all the time? So the Bob Dylan question.
Truly, I would say no, in that for a small museum, and I mean, and I'm facing that right now in Ladysmith, there just is no way. So you try and do something that you know will have a core group who will be positive and happy you've done that. It just is totally unrealistic to say, yes, we're going to do something for everyone. In one program, you can't. You can choose to do so by targeting programs. So you might have a program for newcomers to the community, or a program geared towards family, a family group. But you can't do one thing. I mean, people often say that a special event offers that. I don't know. I think you can just stretch yourself way too thin, and you end up with something that doesn't stick in people's memory because they realize, or they've talked to someone who was disappointed.
Mm-hmm. I don't see any other questions that have come up yet. So while maybe if we wait for them, I'm just going to switch back over to my slides here, which I think people should be able to see now. Oh, we got one more. Last one in from Stephanie. And Stephanie is joining us from Delta. So where do you think public programming is going in the future?
That is a wonderful question. We have examples that are starting to emerge. I was going to mention what Kelowna Museum has. I don't know if Jen is online. It was doing a virtual tour based on the story of pigs being herded down Main Street, Kelowna. So that kind of a virtual interactive program has relevance. What else? Public programming, the having others create, providing them with the place and space in which to do that, and literally just opening things right up. And again, why are you doing that? Well, you give people who don't feel that the museum is relevant the chance to feel some relevance, to feel that they count. You know, it's a wide open question. I think we will continue to have public programming. I think we will continue to have everything from the very traditional through to the way out there, because that is how we show the museum is alive and active and relevant.
And I think that that's a good one to end on. And Jen, I'm sorry, I think I called you John earlier. I didn't know the J Ferguson. So Jen was online. So thanks, Jen, for joining us. So thank you, Lesley, and thank you to everybody for joining us. This has been a really interesting insight into public programming. I definitely think I've learned a lot. Very interesting to see how it all comes together in Lesley's experience and in the many museums she's worked at, as well as just what Lesley's seen from lots of other museums out there. So next month we have something a little bit different. We're going to be joining together on Tuesday, August 15th, and we're going to be talking about building grassroots community partnerships. And I love what Amanda has called it. She's called it cold calling and sweet talking, which I think will definitely highlight some of the things she's going to be talking about and the way that we all sort of make it work. You can register at the link on the page there. I'm going to be sending that around in a follow-up email along with a survey that's going to be a little bit of a follow-up survey. And I know that Lesley has some resources, so Lesley's probably going to send them to me and I'll send them out to everybody as well. But look for that survey email in a couple of minutes here. It's great for us to get your feedback. We normally get about 3/4 of the people answering, so if you could answer, that would be really great. Helps us plan for the future. So thank you to everybody. That's basically dead on an hour. And again, to everybody who is in some of the fire-affected areas and the smoke-affected areas, good luck. We hope that the weather works in your favor and that everything gets back to normal soon for you guys. So thank you, Lesley, and thanks everybody else.